Summer 1942. The Soviet Union is bleeding. Entire divisions of the Red Army are collapsing. Cities are falling, villages burning, and terrified soldiers are retreating through the smoke. German tanks roar across the endless steppe, and the road to Stalingrad lies wide open. Amid the chaos, panic spreads like wildfire. Men abandon their posts. Some throw away their rifles and run. The front line is disintegrating, and the dream of defending the motherland seems lost. But then, a new enemy appears, not the Germans, but something far more terrifying. On July 28, 1942, Joseph Stalin issues a decree that will change the fate of millions. It is called Order Number 227, and its message is carved into history with blood. Not one step back. From this moment on, any soldier who retreats without orders will be treated as a traitor. To move backward is to die, not by German bullets, but by the guns of your own comrades. Tonight, we'll uncover the story behind Stalin's infamous command, why it was issued, how it worked, and the terrible price the Red Army paid to obey it. The story of Order 227 begins long before that fateful summer. 1 year earlier, in 1941, Hitler's armies launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 million German soldiers stormed across the Soviet border, crushing everything in their path. Within weeks, the Red Army lost thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of guns, and millions of men. Entire divisions vanished, prisoner columns stretched for miles. Soviet cities, Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, fell one after another. By winter, the Germans were at the gates of Moscow itself. The Soviet people called it the time of disaster. Stalin's generals panicked. Soldiers deserted by the thousands. Some commanders ordered retreats without permission, hoping to save what little remained of their forces. But each retreat only invited more chaos. When 1942 arrived, the situation grew even worse. Hitler launched Operation Blue, striking toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, the very lifeblood of the Soviet war machine. His other target, Stalingrad, the city that carried Stalin's own name. The Red Army was exhausted, its spirit broken. The soldiers were cold, hungry, and terrified. Many believed the war was already lost, and Stalin knew it. He feared not just losing territory, but losing control over his own army. He once said, "Cowards and panic spread faster than plague. If we allow one step back, the whole front will crumble." So in desperation, Stalin decided there would be no more retreats, no more excuses. If soldiers could not be inspired to stand and fight, they would be forced to. And thus, he prepared a command that would make every man in the Red Army understand one thing. Behind them stood the Germans, but behind them also stood Stalin. On July 28, 1942, Stalin finally put his fear and fury into words. He signed a document titled Order Number 227. Its opening lines were clear and merciless. The enemy is at the gates. Some stupid people think we can retreat further east into the vastness of our land. But every step backward means losing blood, losing strength, losing the motherland itself. From this moment on, not one step back. The order was read aloud to every soldier in the Red Army. Many listened in silence. Others clenched their fists, knowing what it meant. There would be no safe way out. The command created 3 brutal measures to restore discipline and to eliminate fear through terror. First, any officer who allowed his troops to retreat without a direct order would face a military tribunal. Many of them were executed, sometimes within hours. Second, Stalin established the so-called penal battalions, units made up of disgraced officers, deserters, and soldiers accused of cowardice. These men were stripped of their ranks, given minimal weapons, and sent to the most dangerous parts of the front. Their mission was simple: redeem themselves through blood. Few ever returned. Third, and perhaps most terrifying, Stalin ordered the creation of blocking detachments. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were armed troops from the NKVD, Stalin's secret police, positioned behind the front lines. Their task was not to fight the Germans, but to make sure no Soviet soldier retreated. The message was unmistakable. If you advance, you might die. If you retreat, you will die. With one stroke of a pen, Stalin turned the battlefield into a trap, a place where every soldier stood between two guns, the enemy in front and his own country behind him. After the announcement of Order 227, a chilling silence spread through the ranks of the Red Army. Soldiers understood what it meant. From now on, retreat was no longer an option. Behind every line of infantry stood another, not to help, not to reinforce, but to ensure no one ran. These were the blocking detachments, often composed of battle-hardened NKVD troops, men trained in obedience, not mercy. They carried submachine guns and had one simple order: shoot anyone who tried to flee. Imagine standing in a trench, the air thick with smoke and fire, German shells exploding ahead. You hear screams, chaos, your unit begins to fall apart. Instinct tells you to pull back, to survive. But then you glance over your shoulder, and you see your own comrades, NKVD soldiers, aiming their weapons at you. There is no escape. Soviet soldiers soon learned that death waited in both directions. Move forward, and the Germans would kill you. Move back, and your own side would. Reports from the front describe scenes of pure horror. In the chaos of battle, when entire companies began to withdraw, blocking units opened fire on them, mowing down their fellow Soviets to restore discipline. Between August and October of 1942, NKVD detachments detained over 150,000. Red Army soldiers accused of retreating. More than 13,000 were executed on the spot by their own side. Tens of thousands more were sent to penal battalions, where survival was almost impossible. One surviving soldier, Ivan Kopolov, later recalled, "The Germans were not the only ones we feared. The ones behind us were worse. If you turned your back, you'd be dead before you took 3 steps." Another wrote in his diary, found after his death near Stalingrad, "The order says we must not take a single step backward. But what if there is nowhere left to go forward?" On the battlefield, the line between courage and terror disappeared. Soldiers no longer fought for victory. They fought to avoid being shot by their own men. And yet, somehow this madness worked. Under constant threat, Soviet units began to hold their ground. The fear of being executed became stronger than the fear of dying in battle. In September 1942, during the Battle of Stalingrad, entire regiments stood their positions against overwhelming German attacks. Some fought to the last man. Others were wiped out completely, but they did not retreat. Stalin had forged a brutal kind of discipline, one built not on loyalty or pride, but on the sheer instinct to survive between two firing lines. The Red Army was no longer allowed to run. It would either stand and fight, or die where it stood. Order 227 changed everything. On the surface it worked. The Red Army stopped retreating. Lines that once broke under pressure now held their ground. Soldiers who had once fled now fought with desperate fury, in the ashes of fear. Discipline was reborn, not through loyalty, not through love of country, but through terror. The results were undeniable. By the end of 1942, the Soviet front had stabilized. And in the ruins of Stalingrad, where every street became a battlefield, the Red Army stood firm. They were surrounded, starved, bombarded, but they did not move. When the Germans finally began to weaken, Stalin's words, "Not one step back," seemed to echo as prophecy. The victory at Stalingrad turned the tide of the entire war. It marked the beginning of Hitler's downfall. But that triumph came at an unbearable price. Behind every meter of land retaken by the Soviets lay the bodies of not only those killed by, German bullets, but also those executed by their own side. For many soldiers, the battlefield became a nightmare with no escape. They no longer knew what courage meant. Was it bravery to stand and fight, or just fear of being shot from behind? Psychologists who studied survivors after the war described symptoms of deep trauma: men who trembled at the sound of footsteps behind them, who could never again trust anyone standing at their back. Even some officers admitted the moral cost was too high. One Soviet commander, reflecting years later, said quietly, "We won the war, but we lost something inside us while doing it." And yet, Stalin never apologized. He called Order 227 a necessary measure in a time of national death. To him, human lives were simply numbers in the service of survival. After the victory at Stalingrad, the order's harshest measures were gradually relaxed. The blocking detachments were reassigned. The executions became fewer, but the shadow of Order 227 never disappeared. In Russian military archives, the phrase, "not one step back," still stands as both a symbol of defiance and a reminder of what desperation can justify. History remembers the courage of the Red Army, but it also remembers the fear that drove them, because in the end, the line between heroism and terror had been erased. And the Soviet victory, though glorious, was written in the blood of its own soldiers. In the end, Order 227 was more than a military directive. It was a mirror, reflecting the darkest truth about war, that when survival is at stake, humanity itself becomes expendable. Stalin's command, "not one step back," forged the steel backbone that helped save the Soviet Union. But it also left behind a legacy of fear and blood, a generation of men who carried victory on their shoulders and guilt in their hearts. Historians still argue, was it necessary? Could the Red Army have stood its ground without such terror? No one can truly answer. What we do know is this: in 1942, on the edge of total collapse, the Soviet Union was forced to choose between cruelty and extinction, and Stalin chose cruelty, believing that fear could build courage. It's easy, from the comfort of peace, to condemn such brutality. But for those men standing in the fire of Stalingrad, between two lines of guns, the world had no mercy left. Order 227 will forever stand as one of the most ruthless and most effective commands in modern warfare, a reminder that even victory can be born from horror. So when we speak of courage, discipline, or sacrifice, let us also remember the cost, the faces that never returned, and the silence that followed their last step forward. What do you think? Was Stalin's no step back order a necessary evil or an unforgivable crime? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more true stories from history's darkest chapters, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because history always has another side.